So, meet Josephine Ross, a 43-year-old woman living a quiet, unassuming life in Chicago in 1945. She was the kind of person who kept to herself, never stirred the pot, and probably spent her days minding her own business. But sometimes even the quiet ones end up in the middle of the loudest chaos. On June 5th, Josephine's day started like any other. Her life wasn't extraordinary by any means, but it was hers. Unfortunately, it was about to end in a way that would leave Chicago reeling. That evening, her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, and the scene wasn't just tragic. It was chilling. Her throat had been slashed, and there were stab wounds on her body. If that wasn't enough to give investigators nightmares, her head was wrapped in a dress. A dress. It was like her assailant wanted to double down on the grotesque factor, as if ending her life wasn't bad enough. Here's the kicker. Nothing in her apartment was stolen. Not a dime, not a single valuable item. Whoever did this wasn't after money, they were after something far darker. The police worked the case, but there wasn't much to go on. No signs of forced entry meant Josephine might have let her attacker in. Maybe she knew them, or maybe she was just being polite. A reminder that sometimes stranger danger isn't just a warning for kids. The case didn't exactly light up the Chicago PD's solve rate. It went cold faster than a deep dish pizza left out in February. But then, just 6 months later on December 10th, 1945, chaos struck again. This time the victim was Frances Brown, a 33-year-old former Army WAVE living at the Pine Grove Hotel. Frances was no slouch. She was strong, independent, and had served her country. She seemed like the last person who'd find herself in the crosshairs of a deranged mind. But evil doesn't discriminate, does it? When hotel staff entered Frances's apartment, what they found could only be described as horrifying. She had been shot in the head and stabbed multiple times. One knife was embedded so deeply into her body, removing it required considerable effort. And if that wasn't unsettling enough, there it was, the signature. Written on the wall in lipstick. "For heaven's sake, catch me. Before I kill more, I cannot control myself." Let's take a moment to unpack this. First, the melodrama. The capitalized S in sake. The lack of punctuation. Clearly, this killer needed an editor. Second, the audacity to literally beg for capture. Nothing says, "Please help me," like vandalizing a crime scene with beauty products. The note earned the perpetrator the nickname the Lipstick Killer, and Chicago was officially on edge. 2 brutal incidents, 2 seemingly unrelated victims, and one mysterious maniac who clearly thought they were the star of their own twisted show. People started double-locking their doors, and lipstick sales probably dipped. But if you thought the city had seen the worst of it, oh, just wait. On January 7th, 1946, the terror escalated to unthinkable levels. 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan was taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night. Her parents discovered a ransom note demanding $20,000, which in today's money is enough to buy, like, 2 tanks of gas. But this wasn't just a kidnapping. Hours later, the city would learn the horrifying truth. Suzanne's remains were found in multiple locations, including the city's sewers. It wasn't just cruel, it was pure evil. Chicago was stunned, and for once, the media seemed to run out of sensational headlines. This was beyond anything the city had seen. The police were under immense pressure to find the person responsible. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't random. Someone was out there, preying on women and children, leaving behind chaos, heartbreak, and just enough breadcrumbs to taunt the authorities. The lipstick killer wasn't just committing crimes, they were playing a game, and Chicago was their unwilling audience. The city of Chicago was gripped with fear. 3 gruesome crimes, no solid leads, and a killer who seemed to be treating the police like the punchline of their sick joke. By the time Suzanne Degnan's case hit the headlines, people were locking their doors, pulling their curtains tight, and side-eyeing their neighbors. The pressure was on for the police to deliver answers, and they were throwing everything they had at the case, including a few questionable tactics. But let's back up a bit. Suzanne's case wasn't just another headline. It was a waking nightmare for Chicago. The discovery of her remains sent shockwaves through the city, and the ransom note found at her home added a chilling twist. It read, "Get $20,000 ready and wait for word. Do not notify the FBI or police. Bills in 5s and 10s." The note made it clear that whoever was behind this knew exactly how to create chaos and control the narrative. But here's the thing. It wasn't about the money. The note felt more like a smokescreen, a way to misdirect and confuse. The killer didn't want cash. They wanted terror. Police were desperate for any lead. They combed through Suzanne's neighborhood, questioned every shady character they could find, and even brought in psychics. Yes, psychics. That's how out of ideas they were. And while none of that seemed to work, fate, or maybe dumb luck, stepped in. On June 26, 1946, 17-year-old William Heirens was caught during a botched burglary. And oh boy, things were about to get wild. William Heirens wasn't your average petty thief. Sure, he had a habit of breaking into homes and stealing whatever wasn't nailed down, but his rap sheet didn't exactly scream violent mastermind. At first glance, he seemed more like a kleptomaniac with bad timing than the lipstick killer. But when police searched his belongings, they found evidence linking him to multiple burglaries, and suddenly he became their prime suspect. Now, this is where things start to feel less like a police investigation and more like an episode of Law & Order Extremely Questionable Tactics Unit. Heirens was interrogated for days on end. He wasn't allowed to see a lawyer, and the police used everything short of a truth serum to get him to talk. Oh wait, no. They actually did use a truth serum. Sodium pentothal, to be exact. And under its influence, Heirens reportedly claimed that another personality named George was responsible for the crimes. Yep, George. The old "it wasn't me, it was my evil alter ego" defense. Classic. But here's the thing. Heirens' confession was riddled with inconsistencies. He couldn't remember details about the crime scenes, and much of what he said didn't match the evidence. Still, the police weren't about to let this golden opportunity slip away. They had a name, a face, and a suspect they could pin the city's nightmares on. Whether or not he was guilty almost seemed beside the point. During their investigation, police linked Heirens to the Degnan case through some particularly flimsy evidence. A bloody fingerprint found at the scene that they claimed matched his, and handwriting analysis of the ransom note. Spoiler alert, handwriting analysis in the 1940s was about as reliable as asking your dog who did it. But hey, it was enough to make headlines, and in the court of public opinion, Heirens was already guilty. Faced with overwhelming pressure and the looming threat of the electric chair, Heirens struck a plea deal. He confessed to all three murders: Josephine Ross, Frances Brown, and Suzanne Degnan. In exchange, he avoided execution and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. For the police, it was a slam dunk. For the public, it was closure. And for Heirens? Well, let's just say he had a lot of time to think about whether that deal was worth it. But was Heirens really the lipstick killer? Or was he just a convenient scapegoat for a city desperate for answers? That's where things get murky. Stay tuned for the final part of this twisted tale, where we dig into the lingering questions and controversies surrounding the case. Even with William Heirens behind bars, the lipstick murders case felt far from settled. Sure, the public breathed a collective sigh of relief when he confessed, but as the years passed, doubts began to creep in like a bad draft through a locked door. People started asking questions. Big, uncomfortable questions. Was Heirens really the lipstick killer? Or was this case wrapped up a little too neatly? Let's start with the confession. Heirens admitted to the crimes as part of a plea deal, but the details were sketchy at best. Under the influence of truth serum, he'd claimed an alternate personality named George committed the murders. Not exactly a rock-solid alibi. Later, Heirens recanted his confession, insisting it had been coerced after days of relentless interrogation without legal representation. And honestly, that wasn't hard to believe. Police tactics at the time weren't exactly known for their compassion. If you're picturing a dimly lit room, a sweaty teenager, and a lot of yelling, you're probably not far off. But it wasn't just the confession that raised eyebrows. Some of the evidence linking Heirens to the crimes was, let's say, questionable. Take the ransom note in Suzanne Degnan's case. Experts claimed the handwriting matched Heirens's, but let's remember this was the 1940s. Handwriting analysis was more art than science, a fancy way of saying, we're guessing, but with flair. Then there was the bloody fingerprint at the Degnan crime scene. While investigators claimed it matched Heirens, later forensic reviews suggested otherwise. If you're keeping score, that's two big red flags. And what about the lipstick message? For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. Was this really written by the same person who committed such calculated, brutal crimes? It felt off. Too dramatic, too theatrical, almost like a red herring designed to throw investigators off track. Some theorists suggested that Chicago might have been dealing with more than one criminal, maybe a copycat, or even an entirely separate killer. Heirens maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. He spent 65 years in prison, earning the dubious title of Illinois' longest-serving inmate. Over the decades, he became something of a model prisoner, earning multiple degrees and even teaching classes. But no matter how much good he did behind bars, the question of his guilt loomed large. Was he a cold-blooded killer who got what he deserved, or a petty thief who became the fall guy for Chicago's most infamous crime spree? In the end, the lipstick murders left more questions than answers. If Heirens wasn't the real killer, then who was? And why did the city and its justice system seem so eager to close the case? These questions might never be answered, but one thing's for sure: the lipstick murders will forever be one of Chicago's most chilling and controversial tales. Thanks for tuning into Talescape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, crime, and the dark corners of human nature. And hey, maybe double-check your handwriting before sending out ransom notes. It's just good advice.